What's up, guys? If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Also, please smash that like button on the video and enjoy the show. You really painted this full picture backstory that I had no idea about in this book about the whole operation to get rid of it and to get it out of there. So how again did the UN, I read the book about a year ago, so some of it's a little hazy, but how again did the UN get access to Syria? Did Assad technically let them in, or did they forcibly come in? What went down?
Yeah. So when Assad used these weapons, it looks clear in hindsight that the Syrian army had no idea what they had just done. They thought they'd launched some chemical weapons. They didn't realize that 1,300 people were going to die because of it. So you have the next day, you've got these horrific images all over, cable news throughout the world of this massacre. And it's all kids and women because they're the ones in the bomb shelters and they're the ones who got killed for the most part. And so Russia, being Assad's big backer and sponsor, just got on Assad's ass and said, this is, we can't have this. You just embarrassed us in front of the world. You said you didn't have any chemical weapons at all, and now we all look like idiots. So they forced the Syrian government to cut a deal. And the deal was, you as your price for being idiots here, you have to eliminate your entire program. You have to unilaterally give up all the chemical weapons you have. And that's a one-sided give up because the rebels don't have to give up anything. Syria has to give up its most important, most expensive weapons program as the whole world watched. And it was because of Russia's embarrassment that basically a deal was brokered that the UN could come in and help Syria destroy these weapons.
Do we know for a fact that they gave up every location they had?
They didn't, and they didn't from the very beginning. So in the very first kind of declarations, the Syrians were asked, okay, well, we got to list all the places where they are and tell us, what condition they're in. And it was all a bunch of lies in the beginning. But we called them on it because, remember, we had a spy inside Syria's chemical weapons program up until 2004 when he screwed up and got caught being a spy and was executed. But up until then,
he was executed.
He was executed. Yeah, he was arrested because of a corruption suspicion, but he thought he was being arrested because the Syrians discovered he was spying for the CIA. So he admitted to the wrong crime, and of course he was taken out and shot almost right away. But up until that moment, we had really good intel on exactly what they had and where it was, and so they started to give us some crap. We just said, oh, no, here's the satellite pictures. Here's where your stuff is, and you better give it up, or we're gonna reconsider this whole airstrike thing. And so they were forced to give up most of what they had, but they still didn't do it all. They hid some of it away. They kind of fudged their records, and so we didn't get everything.
So there's still some there today.
We got about 95%. That's what the CIA thinks.
But that's still dangerous.
That's a massive amount of material.
Yeah.
And of course, the other big issue is, okay, so you've got all these chemical weapons. How in the world do you get them out of a country that's in the middle of a civil war?
This was amazing. Yeah. This whole thing.
And then what do you do when you get them out? I mean, who's going to take 1,300 tons of liquid chemical weapons? We're not. The Americans aren't going to take it. Russia didn't want to take it. And so you're stuck with this thing that, okay, well, we can get them out, but what are we going to do with them? And so there was a whole kind of meltdown over physically how you destroy a stockpile of this size without anybody getting killed.
Can you explain how they did this? Because this was amazing. They built this ship specially for it and was emanating from America.
Yeah.
I forget, the place was in Maryland, is that right?
It was actually in Virginia, down in the Portsmouth, Norfolk area. But
and who was that guy? What was this?
This is a crazy, crazy story. And it only happens, it sounds like a movie, but basically they had this one kind of cranky old guy in the army whose job, that was his entire career, was cleaning up chemical weapons and usually finding old stockpiles around the world. And his and his team, their job was to kind of make these things go away. And so they came to this guy. His name was Tim Blades. He's still working down in Maryland, and said, "What's the best way to get rid of this stuff?" And his little back of an envelope sketch becomes a floating chemical weapons destruction factory that was built from scratch on an old cargo ship and then sent out to the middle of the Mediterranean. And the plan was when those weapons finally come out, they're going to go on this boat, and Tim Blades and his crew are going to make them go away and just destroy them. And they didn't have a great plan, as it turned out. It worked just barely, but it also almost capsized the ship because they almost ran out of fuel, and the ship was becoming top heavy and had all these
Can you explain how it worked though? Because like all I kept thinking about, and maybe I was thinking about this wrong, but I'm like, this is so close to an environmental disaster, right? Like I don't know how gas would behave. You said water destroys it, so maybe not. I guess if it's in the middle of the Mediterranean, but you know, there you got a whole crew of people, and you got enough gas to kill a whole country on board. But how did they build this thing?
Yeah. So water is a key, but it's a very complicated process. You basically have to take the chemicals and then pressure push a bunch of water, and water molecules blend with it. It's a fairly technical mechanical process, but you're right about the environmental concerns. All of Southern Europe, when the word gets out that the Americans have this big ship of floating chemical weapons, right off the coast of Greece and Italy, people went bananas. They sent like flotillas of activists out to chase the ship and try to stop them, and everybody was worried that this stuff was going to. The place was going to, capsize, and all these fish would be killed, and God knows what else, and dead things washing up on beaches. And it didn't happen, but it happened almost. In the fact that it succeeded was just almost accidental. I mean, these guys knew what they were doing, but nobody had ever done anything like this before on this scale, on a boat in the middle of the Mediterranean. As if you think about...
Did they have to pick like where specifically?
Yeah, so they
like
picked
were there countries that were upset it was in their area?
It had to be kind of international waters and far enough off sea so nobody could really monitor them. And so they had like this little rectangle of space in the middle of the Mediterranean. They just basically did laps around it for 42 days while the chemicals were being destroyed. And it just... it was that the idea was great, and the guys who did it were just unbelievably brave. But because no one had ever done it before, and because it's crazy to try to do it on a boat that rocks and that there's waves and winds and nothing is stable on a boat, and so it's the worst possible place to try to pull off something like this. And they managed to just succeed. They got the last barrel destroyed as they were running out of fuel. And if they'd run out of fuel, because that's ballast in the ship could have capsized. And they were doing programs. They checked the programs later about the boat's stability. It should have capsized in the last week of operation, and it didn't.
That's crazy, man. So it was 42 days where they're going around in a circle, and this is in like 2014?
So it's August of 2014 where it's like crazy hot in the Mediterranean. These guys are working in, full hazard suits, 24 hours, like 12-hour shifts, and day and night just sweating their nuts off and not getting much sleep and just working on kind of destroy this stockpile one barrel at a time. And the guys who did it just was one of the most difficult things that any of them have ever done. And they're completely anonymous. Nobody knows who they are. Nobody had heard of Tim Blades outside, a few departments in the Pentagon. And he was absolutely a hero. I mean, he came up with a pretty bold plan, talked people into it, and just had the balls to get on this boat and do it himself. He was there, wiping spills off the deck himself with his own handkerchief. It was that kind of guy who just had to make sure he was on top of every detail when it was going on.
And you talked to him for this
Spent
book.
a lot of time, went on the boat with him.
That's cool.
Yeah, the captain who piloted the ship came back for a little reunion, and so we all got to spend like 3 days just talking about just every detail of how this thing came together and how improbable it was. And nobody at the Pentagon wanted to do this. Nobody thought it was a good idea to put chemical weapons on a boat and try to destroy them. And in the end, it was the only plan they had. It's the only thing they could come up with to get rid of them.
And once they did this, what happened? So they're allowed to, there was the deal brokered, like you said, where Russia forced Assad to say, yes, you can come do this. They take it out, they get it on this boat, they destroy it, they think they got 95% of it, whatever they got. What was the immediate aftermath in the relationship with Assad? Was there any type of attempt at diplomacy between him and the United States, or has it been completely ice cold and no communication since then?
It started to sour about halfway through this program. The Syrians played real nice in the beginning, and we always wanted to get rid of these things anyway, so thanks for helping us out. And then, but then as they started going along, the Syrians just started like dragging their feet and making excuses and putting up obstacles. And by the end, it was just everybody was furious at each other. But the one thing that kept it together is because at that moment when they were getting rid of the last stockpiles of chemical weapons, the Islamist groups, the terrorists, were starting to really be on the march and taking over whole areas of Syria that they hadn't had before. And the last stockpile of chemicals that existed in Syria was on an air base out in the desert that was surrounded at the time by jihadists.
Oh,
And-
that's
and
nice.
They would have loved to have gotten their hands on
I'll
it.
bet.
There's something like 6,000 gallons of sarin precursor, enough to fill a small swimming pool. Can you imagine just a few drops kill somebody? What kind of damage you could do with something like that?
Oh my
And it was
God.
literally the reason that the last shipments of this stuff had trouble getting out was because they had to run a gauntlet of terrorist groups that had surrounded the base completely and blockaded it. They had to kind of fight their way out in order to get the stuff to the port.
Now, I'm trying to remember exactly who has reported on this. I want to say Cy Hirsch is one of them, but there is the theory that CIA would have done this.
Yeah.
What I've never fully understood there is what their motive would have been. Because the way I understand it is that they had bigger fish to fry. Like if they were going to try to start some in the Middle East, they had way bigger fish to fry at the time than
Yeah.
Syria.
Yeah, so the conspiracy theory that's come up around this is that anybody who wanted to see the Americans involved in this war, they would have a motive potentially
Sure.
to try to do a false flag chemical weapons attack. So, what if it was the CIA that launched those rockets and killed all those people? That runs into trouble real quickly because the CIA had wanted nothing to do with the war. They did not want to get involved. They did everything they could to avoid Americans getting involved. So they
How do
weren't-
we know that?
Well, I just, from covering at the time, going to many meetings and drinks and lunches with guys who were running the program at the time, they didn't want to they'd just gotten out of Iraq. There's no benefit for Americans getting involved in Syria. It was another quagmire. They just did not want to get involved with it. So the fact that the idea that the CIA would want to sort of trigger something, it just doesn't make any sense. There are other people who could have, like say the rebels, for example, and that was the more credible theory that maybe the rebels got hold of some chemical weapons and launched this attack.
Yes.
And that seemed credible even to the UN inspectors who first came in to investigate this chemical attack in 2013. They thought, what? Well, maybe the rebels had staged this. It took a pretty impressive forensic investigation to figure out, well, no, the rockets were fired from this location, and that's where the Syrian army was. It's not where the rebels were. The rockets, the munitions that were used, the chemicals that were used, everything tracks back to the Syrian regime. There's never been any evidence that the rebels ever got any significant quantities of sarin or anything else. So essentially, almost by process of elimination and by good forensic evidence, it all points to Syria itself. And there's little things, too, that kind of reinforce that belief, such as when the attack happened in 2013, there were intercepts of Syrian generals and army officers talking to each other about, whoops, we really screwed up. Did you see all the people who were killed from this? We're really going to be in trouble with the boss. So we have that kind of intelligence, too. So all adds up, pretty clear portrait of a Syrian government trying to find some desperate means of fighting a war that they weren't winning.
Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.